I want you to think about something that most people spend their entire lives carefully avoiding thinking about. Not because it is too complicated. Not because it requires any special knowledge or any particular level of intelligence to understand, but because it is too close, too personal, too uncomfortably accurate to sit with for very long without feeling the full weight of what it is actually saying about the life you are currently living. Here is the thought. What if you have not actually been living your life? What if what you have been calling living, the routines, the schedules, the familiar patterns, the comfortable, predictable rhythm of your days, is not actually a life being lived at all? What if it is something far more unsettling than that? What if it is the same single day being lived over and over again with nothing but a different date to distinguish one from the next? Because here is what I have come to understand about most human beings. We do not lose our lives all at once. There is no single catastrophic moment where everything meaningful drains away and we are left with nothing. We lose our lives gradually, invisibly, one repeated day at a time, one familiar choice at a time, one moment of sleepwalking at a time, until we look up one day, sometimes in our 30s, sometimes in our 50s, sometimes not until the very end, and realize with a clarity that is almost physically painful that the life we were meant to live and the life we actually lived are two completely different stories, and the most devastating part of that realization is not the distance between those two stories. The most devastating part is understanding that nobody took that life from you. No external force stole it. No single wrong decision destroyed it. It simply repeated itself into disappearance. One comfortable, familiar autopilot day at a time. That is not a comfortable truth. I know that. But it is the most necessary truth you will hear today. Because you cannot interrupt a pattern you have not honestly named. You cannot break a cycle you have not clearly seen. And you cannot begin to truly live until you are willing to look directly at the evidence that right now in this moment you might not be living at all. You are not here today because your life is perfect. You are here because something inside you already knows that what you have been calling living is actually something else entirely, and that something else has a name and its name is repeating. I want you to think about yesterday, not in a general way. I mean specifically. I want you to walk back through yesterday hour by hour and tell me something that happened that was genuinely different from the day before, something that surprised you, something that challenged you, something that made you feel truly alive in a way that was unexpected and unplanned and completely outside the rhythm of what your life normally looks like. For most people, that question lands in silence. And that silence is not emptiness. That silence is information. That silence is telling you something that your busy schedule and your comfortable routine and your familiar surroundings have been quietly drowning out for a very long time. It is telling you that you have not been living your life. You have been repeating it. And I want to be very clear about what I mean by that, because repeating does not always look like failure. It does not always look like misery. In fact, the most dangerous version of repeating looks remarkably like success from the outside. It looks like a steady job and a consistent schedule and a predictable week that flows into a predictable month that flows into a predictable year. It looks responsible. It looks stable. It looks like exactly what a well-managed life is supposed to look like. And that is precisely what makes it so difficult to recognize as a trap. Because routine in itself is not the enemy. Structure is not the problem. The problem begins at the exact moment your routine stops being a foundation that supports your growth and starts being a cage that contains it. The problem begins when the schedule you built to serve your life starts being the only thing your life actually serves. When you are no longer using your routine is using you. Think about the last time you genuinely surprised yourself. The last time you did something you had never done before. The last time you felt the specific aliveness that only comes from stepping into unfamiliar territory and discovering something new about who you are and what you are capable of. For some people, that memory is recent, but for far too many people, that memory is years old, and they did not notice the distance growing because every day felt normal, every week felt fine, every month felt manageable, and manageable quietly became the ceiling of what they expected from their own existence. This is the repeat trap. And it does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a warning. It builds itself one comfortable day at a time until the walls are so familiar that they no longer feel like walls at all. They feel like home. And leaving home, even a home, that is slowly suffocating you, is one of the hardest things a human being can ever choose to do. But here is what I need you to understand right now with complete clarity. A life that only repeats is not a life being lived. It is a life being survived on loop. And you were born for something far too significant to spend it pressing replay. Now that we have named the trap, now that we have identified the invisible cage that routine builds around a life that was meant to be so much more than a series of repeated days, I want to go deeper. I want to go to the place where the repeat actually begins. Because the repeat does not start in your schedule. It does not start in your habits or your environment or the people around you. It starts somewhere far more fundamental than any of those things. It starts in the one place that most people never think to examine. The one place that is running everything behind the scenes of your entire existence. It starts in your mind. Specifically, it starts in the thoughts you think every single day without even realizing you are thinking them. Because here is something that most people go their entire lives without truly understanding. You do not experience the world as it is. You experience the world as you are. Your external reality is not an objective landscape that exists independently of you. It is a direct reflection of the patterns, the beliefs, the habitual thoughts and assumptions that are running continuously in the background of your consciousness every single moment of every single day. And when those patterns never change, when those thoughts never evolve, when the mental loops that have been playing since you were young continue playing without ever being examined or challenged or interrupted, your life cannot change. It literally cannot. Because the life you are living is always and only a projection of the mind that is creating it. Think about what you actually think about on a typical day. Not the intentional thoughts. Not the moments when you sit down deliberately to plan or reflect or dream. I mean the automatic thoughts. The ones that arrive without invitation the moment you wake up. The ones that fill the spaces between tasks. The ones that run beneath every conversation and every decision and every moment of stillness. For most people, those thoughts are almost identical today to what they were last year. The same worries, the same self-assessments, the same stories about who they are and what they deserve and what is possible for someone like them. The same internal narrative playing on an endless loop like a song that has been on repeat for so long that you stopped noticing it was even playing. And that loop is building your life. Thought by thought, day by day, year by year. Every thought you think is the instruction being sent to your behavior. Every belief you hold is a filter through which every opportunity and every possibility and every version of your future is being evaluated. And if the instructions never change, the behavior never changes. And if the behavior never changes, the results never change. And if the results never change, the life never changes. The loop continues. The repeat deepens. And another year passes that looks almost identical to the last. This is why you cannot simply change your circumstances and expect your life to transform. You can move to a new city with the same mind and recreate the same life in a different location. You can start a new relationship with the same patterns and watch the same story unfold with a different person. You can change everything on the outside while leaving the inside completely untouched and wonder why nothing ever truly feels different. Because the outside was never the origin. The mind was always the origin. And a new life built on an unchanged mind is not a new life at all. It is the same repeat wearing a different costume. The most radical and most necessary work you will ever do is not external. It is internal. It is the daily, deliberate, deeply uncomfortable practice of examining the thoughts that are running your life and asking, is this thought true? Is this belief actually mine? Is this story I keep telling myself about who I am and what I am capable of actually accurate? Or is it simply familiar? Because familiar and true are not the same thing. And the moment you begin to separate those two things is the moment the loop finally has a chance to break. You will never live a new life with an unchanged mind, and because the thoughts you refuse to examine today are the walls of the prison you will wake up inside again tomorrow. We have talked about the repeat trap and how routine becomes a prison so comfortable that most people never even recognize the bars. We have talked about the mental loop and how the unchanged mind keeps building the same life year after year, with nothing but different dates on the calendar. And now I want to go somewhere that most motivational speeches never go. I want to talk about something that happens so gradually, so quietly, so completely beneath the surface of everyday awareness that by the time most people notice it, it has already been happening for years. I want to talk about the moment you stopped feeling. Not the dramatic moment. Not the single identifiable event where you can point to a specific day and say that is when it happened. I am talking about the slow, almost imperceptible process through which a human being, who was once fully alive to their own experience, gradually learns to turn the volume down on everything they feel, until the silence becomes so normal that they stop, remembering what the music sounded like. And here is the part that makes this so incredibly difficult to address, because most people who have gone through this process did not experience it as a loss. They experienced it as growth. They called it maturity. They called it wisdom. They called it finally getting their emotions under control and learning not to be so affected by everything. And the people around them probably agreed, probably told them they seemed more stable, more grounded, more level-headed than before. And so the numbness got reinforced, and the disconnection deepened. And what was actually a slow withdrawal from the full experience of being alive got repackaged as emotional intelligence and celebrated as a sign of becoming more evolved. But let me ask you something honest. When was the last time you felt something so deeply that it moved you to tears? Not from pain or frustration, but from pure, overwhelming beauty or gratitude or wonder. When was the last time you were so genuinely excited about something in your own life that you could not sleep? When was the last time you felt that specific electric aliveness that comes from being completely present in a moment that mattered? When was the last time your own life made you feel something real? Because feeling deeply is not weakness. Feeling deeply is not immaturity. Feeling deeply is not something to be managed and minimized and kept carefully under control so that you never again have to experience the vulnerability of being fully alive in your own experience. Feeling deeply is the entire point. It is the evidence that you are actually here, actually present, actually inhabiting your own existence rather than simply administering it from a safe emotional distance. Think about the children you have known or the child you once were. That child did not experience life through a filter of careful emotional management. That child was completely unguarded in their joy and their curiosity and their wonder and their grief and their love. Every experience landed fully. Every moment registered completely. And somewhere between that child and the person you are today, a decision got made. Not a conscious one, not a deliberate one, but a decision nonetheless. A decision that feeling everything was too risky, that being fully open was too dangerous, that the safest way to move through a world that had hurt you was to feel it a little less, and then a little less again, and then a little less after that, until one day the volume was so low that life stopped feeling like something happening to you and started feeling like something you were simply passing through. And passing through is not living. Passing through is the most sophisticated and socially acceptable form of the repeat, because when you are numb, you do not grow. You do not truly connect. You do not make bold decisions or take courageous leaps or allow yourself to be moved by the extraordinary gift of simply being alive on this earth at this specific, unrepeatable moment in history. Feeling is not the opposite of strength. Feeling is the source of it. Every great decision ever made came from someone who allowed themselves to feel the full weight of what mattered to them. Every meaningful relationship ever built was constructed on the foundation of two people willing to feel deeply in each other's presence. Every life ever truly lived was lived by someone who refused to turn the volume down no matter how many times the world gave them a reason to. The day you stopped feeling deeply was not the day you became stronger. It was the day you started disappearing from your own life, and the only way back is to turn the volume up again. We have talked about the repeat trap and how the comfortable routine becomes an invisible prison built one familiar day at a time. We have talked about the mental loop and how the unchanged mind keeps manufacturing the same life regardless of how much time passes. We have talked about the slow disappearance that happens when feeling gets replaced by numbness and aliveness gets replaced by administration. And now I want to talk about the specific choice. The daily, recurring, seemingly insignificant choice that sits at the very heart of why the repeat continues. The choice that most people make so automatically, so reflexively, so completely without awareness that they do not even recognize it as a choice at all. The choice of the familiar over the meaningful. And I want you to understand something about familiarity before we go any further. Because familiarity is not simply a preference. It is not just a personality trait that some people have more of than others. Familiarity is one of the most powerful psychological forces in the entire human experience. Your brain is literally designed to seek it, wired from the very beginning to classify the known as safe and the unknown as threatening, and that wiring served our ancestors extraordinarily well. In a world where the unfamiliar genuinely meant danger, the instinct to stay close to what was known kept human beings alive. But you are not living in that world. and yet you are still running that same ancient programming every single day, choosing the familiar job over the meaningful calling, choosing the familiar relationship dynamic over the honest conversation that could transform it, choosing the familiar version of yourself over the unfamiliar version that is waiting just beyond the edge of everything you have always done. And here's what makes this choice so devastatingly effective at keeping you stuck. It never feels like self-sabotage. It never feels like you are choosing against yourself. It always feels completely reasonable. It always comes dressed in the language of responsibility and practicality and wisdom. I will pursue that dream when the timing is better. I will have that honest conversation when things are less tense. I will take that risk when I have more security behind me. I will step into that unfamiliar version of myself when I feel more ready. And every single one of those sentences sounds mature and measured and sensible. But every single one of them is the familiar winning another round against the meaningful. And another day gets added to the repeat. Think about the most meaningful experiences of your entire life. The moments that genuinely changed you. The relationships that truly shaped you. The decisions that opened your life up into something you could not have predicted or planned or controlled. Every single one of those moments had one thing in common. They all required you to step away from what was familiar and walk towards something that felt uncertain and uncomfortable and completely unguaranteed. The promotion you were not sure you deserved but applied for anyway. The conversation you were terrified to have but had anyway. The leap you could not fully justify logically but took anyway. Every single moment that made your life more meaningful was born in the exact moment you chose the unfamiliar over the safe. Because meaning does not live in the familiar. It never has. Meaning lives at the intersection of courage and uncertainty. Meaning lives in the moment you say yes to something your comfort immediately rejects. Meaning lives in the conversations that make your heart race and the decisions that keep you up at night and the versions of yourself that only become available when you are willing to release the version you have been holding on to simply because you have always known it. And every single day that you choose, familiar over meaningful is not a neutral day. It is not simply a day where nothing happened. It is a day where something very specific happened. You chose the repeat. You voted for the loop. You told the most alive and most courageous part of yourself to wait one more day, and that part of you is still waiting. It has been waiting through every safe choice and every familiar morning and every reasonable decision that kept your life comfortable, but never moved it forward into the territory where the meaningful things actually live. The meaningful life is not hiding from you. It is not out of reach. It is not reserved for people with more courage or more resources or more favorable circumstances than you currently have. It is sitting on the other side of the unfamiliar door that you have been walking past every single day. The door that makes your stomach tighten when you look at it. The door that your familiar mind immediately generates 10 logical reasons not to open. That tightening is not a warning. That is a compass. That is the most reliable signal available to you that something genuinely meaningful is waiting on the other side. Every time you choose the familiar over the meaningful, you cast a vote for the repeat, and the life you were truly meant to live will keep waiting patiently. On the other side of the door, you keep walking. Past. We have covered so much ground together in this speech. We have talked about the repeat trap and the invisible prison that routine builds around a life that was always meant for more. We have talked about the mental loop that keeps manufacturing the same reality from the same unchanged patterns of thought. We have talked about the slow disappearance that happens when feeling gets replaced by numbness. We have talked about the daily choice of familiar over meaningful, and how that single recurring choice quietly writes the story of a life unlived. And now I want to talk about the state that makes all of those things not just possible, but invisible. The state that allows the repeat to continue day after day, year after year, without ever triggering the alarm that something deeply important is being lost. I want to talk about sleepwalking, not the literal kind. I am talking about the far more common and far more costly version, the kind where your eyes are completely open, where you are physically present in every room you enter, where you are technically showing up to every part of your life, your job, your relationships, your daily responsibilities, your routines, but where something essential is absent, where the person who is supposed to be inhabiting all of those spaces is not really there, not fully, not consciously, not with the kind of deliberate, alive awareness that transforms ordinary moments into an actual life. And I want you to think honestly about how much of your day is spent on autopilot. Not just the physical tasks, not just the commute or the morning routine or the familiar paths you walk without looking, I mean the deeper autopilot, the one where you sit in a conversation and your mouth is moving, but your mind is somewhere else entirely. The one where you eat a meal and have no memory of tasting it. The one where an entire evening passes and when you try to account for it, you genuinely cannot say what you did with those hours. The one where you look up from the blur of a week and feel a strange and unsettling sense that time is moving without you. That life is happening in the vicinity of your body, but somehow not inside your actual experience. That is sleepwalking, and it is not a character flaw. It is not laziness. It is not something that only happens to people who are careless or unconscious or spiritually undeveloped. It happens to extraordinarily intelligent and deeply caring human beings who simply got so overwhelmed by the volume and velocity of modern life that at some point the mind made a very practical decision. It decided that the most efficient way to handle a life full of repetitive demands and familiar stimuli was to automate as much of it as possible, to run the known patterns on autopilot so that the limited resource of conscious attention could be preserved for genuine novelty and genuine threat. The problem is that when everything becomes familiar, when the job and the relationship and the home and the social circle and the daily routine all fall below the threshold of genuine novelty, the autopilot takes over almost everything, and you stop experiencing your life from the inside. You start observing it from a distance. You become an audience member in your own story, present enough to keep things running, absent enough that the running of things is all that actually happens. And here is what that costs you that no amount of efficiency can compensate for. It costs you the moments, the actual irreplaceable moments that make up the only life you will ever have. The conversation with your child that you were physically present for but mentally miles away from. The sunset that happened directly in front of you, while you were composing a response to an email that will be forgotten within a week. The moment of genuine connection that was available in an ordinary Tuesday afternoon that passed completely unnoticed because Tuesday afternoons had long since been classified by your autopilot as containing nothing worth being present. For presence is not a luxury. It is not something you earn access to on weekends or vacations or special occasions. Presence is the entire substance of a life. It is the difference between a life that was lived and a life that was merely logged. And waking up inside your own existence, genuinely, deliberately, with the full force of your conscious awareness directed at the actual texture of this actual moment, is not just a spiritual practice or a wellness trend. It is the most radical and most necessary act of resistance available to any human being who has been sleepwalking through the repeat, because the life you have been looking for is not in the future. It is not waiting for you on the other side of the next achievement or the next change or the next season, when things finally slow down enough for you to pay attention. It is here, it is now, it is in this moment and the next one and the one after that, but only if you are actually awake enough to receive. Yet the most expensive thing you will ever lose is not money or time or opportunity. It is the moments of your own life that passed while you were present in body but completely absent in soul. Here is the expanded Key Point 6, Full Speech Style. We have walked through every layer of the repeat together in this speech. We have named the trap. We have exposed the mental loop. We have talked about the numbness that replaced your feeling, and the familiar that replaced your meaningful, and the sleepwalking that replaced your presence. And now we have arrived at the most important moment of everything we have discussed today, not because it is the last point, but because it is the only point that changes anything. It is the point where this speech stops being something you listen to and starts being something that actually alters the direction of your life. I want to talk about breaking the cycle, and I need to tell you something about that phrase immediately, because when most people hear break the cycle, they imagine something dramatic, something sweeping and sudden and cinematic. They imagine quitting the job in one bold moment, or moving to a new city, or making some grand transformational gesture that signals to the world and to themselves that everything is different now. And sometimes those things are necessary, but that is not where breaking the cycle actually begins. And believing that it has to begin there is one of the primary reasons most people never begin at all. Breaking the cycle begins with something so small that the mind almost dismisses it as insignificant. It begins with a single moment of genuine awareness. One moment where you catch yourself in the repeat, and instead of continuing on autopilot, you stop. You actually stop. You look at what you are doing, what you are thinking, what you are choosing, and you ask a question that the sleepwalking version of you never asks. You ask, is this who I actually want to be? Is this the life I actually want to be living? Is this moment, this choice, this thought, this version of myself, is this the story I want to keep telling? Because awareness is not passive. Genuine awareness is the most disruptive force available to the human mind. The moment you truly see the loop you are in, the loop loses its automatic power over you. It does not disappear immediately. It does not dissolve the moment you recognize it. But it can no longer run completely without your knowledge. And that knowledge, and that simple, clear, honest knowledge, is the crack in the wall. It is the first breath of fresh air in a room that has been sealed for too long. It is the beginning of everything. And from that awareness, one different choice becomes possible. Not 20 different choices. Not a complete life overhaul. One conversation you have differently than you would have had it yesterday. One morning where you do something that breaks the automatic sequence of your routine. One thought you challenge instead of automatically believing. One door you open instead of walking past. One moment where you choose the meaningful over the familiar, not because everything feels aligned and perfect and ready, but simply because you are finally awake enough to recognize that the choice exists, and that one different choice does something extraordinary. It creates evidence, real, personal, undeniable evidence that the loop is not as fixed as it felt, that the repeat is not as permanent as it appeared, that you are not as locked into the pattern as you believed, and that evidence becomes the foundation of the next different choice, and the next. And gradually, not all at once but undeniably and irreversibly, the repeat begins to loosen its grip. The loop begins to open, and the life that was always waiting beneath the surface of all those repeated days begins to emerge with a clarity and a vitality and a sense of genuine aliveness that no amount of comfort or familiarity could ever replicate. Because you were never condemned to repeat. That was never the sentence. The repeat was never a life verdict handed down by fate or circumstance or the weight of everything that happened before this moment. It was always a pattern, and patterns can be interrupted. Patterns can be examined. Patterns can be replaced one conscious choice at a time by something more honest and more intentional, and more aligned with the specific, irreplaceable human being that you actually are beneath all the repetition. You are not the loop. You never were. You are the awareness that can observe the loop and choose differently. You are the consciousness that can look at the repeat and decide that today, not someday, not eventually, not when conditions improve, but today, is the day the story changes. You are the author of every chapter that has not yet been written, and the pen is in your hand right now in this exact moment with all of its imperfection and uncertainty and beautiful, unrepeatable potential. The cycle breaks the moment you decide it does, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. One aware moment, one different choice, one breath taken consciously inside a life that has been running on autopilot for far too long. You are not condemned to repeat the life you have been living. You are one moment of genuine awareness away from writing the first line of a completely different story. And so here we are, at the end of everything we have uncovered together today, and I want to be very intentional about how I leave you in this moment, because I am not interested in sending you back into your life, feeling temporarily inspired and then watching that inspiration fade by tomorrow morning, when the alarm goes off and the routine reasserts itself and the familiar patterns reclaim their grip on your day as if this conversation never happened. Want something more than that for you. And I believe you want something more than that for yourself, because if you did not, you would not still be here. You would not have stayed through every layer of this conversation. You would not have felt what you felt when certain words landed in places inside you that you did not expect them to reach. Something in you is awake right now. Something in you is leaning forward. Something in you recognizes the repeat for exactly what it is and is ready, genuinely, urgently, completely ready to choose something different. So I want to leave you with this, not as motivation, not as a temporary emotional peak that recedes like a wave back into the ocean of the ordinary, but as a permanent shift in the way you see your own life from this moment forward. You are not your routine. You are not your mental loop. You are not the numbness that replaced your feeling, or the familiar that replaced your meaningful, or the autopilot that replaced your presence. You are none of those things. Those are patterns. Those are layers. Those are the accumulated weight of years of unconscious repetition that were never meant to become your permanent identity. Beneath all of that, beneath every repeated day and every unchanged thought, and every moment you spent present in body but absent in soul, there is something that the repeat could never touch. Something that survived every comfortable compromise and every familiar choice and every sleepwalking season of your life, completely intact. Your awareness, your capacity to feel, your ability to choose differently in this moment than you chose in the last one, your irreducible, indestructible, completely alive inner life that has been waiting with extraordinary patience for you to come back to it. Come back to it today, not tomorrow, not after the weekend, not when the conditions improve or the timing feels better or the fear finally goes quiet. Today, in this moment, with this breath, with this one decision to pay attention to your own life in a way that you may not have paid attention to it in a very long time. One aware moment, one different choice, one door opened instead of walked past, one feeling felt instead of managed, one thought challenged instead of automatically believed, one day lived instead of simply repeated. That is all it takes to begin. Not to finish, not to arrive, but to begin. And beginning is everything. Beginning is the only thing that the repeat cannot survive. You have been living the same life on repeat for long enough, and the only thing standing between the life you have been repeating and the life you were born to live is the decision you make in the next moment after this speech ends.